Who is afraid of whom? Whose strategy will work to win? Oleksandr Morozov is a political scientist, political philosopher, researcher at Charles University in Prague. Alexander, hello? It's either NATO or nukes. Vladimir Zelensky's statement about the plan to win the EU summit triggered a wave of discussions, including information that Kiev is considering nuclear weapons, which we have not had for a long time. Russia, which acted as a guarantor of our security under the Budapest Memorandum, has itself violated that agreement and is using the nuclear threat. What did you understand more about the Kremlin? First, the Kremlin has not yet reacted so clearly to the so-called major victory that President Zelensky delivered. So far, we can only see the comments of Kremlin commentators, which are divided into two parts. On the one hand, there is a very critical attitude to what Zelensky said. The comments are basically that he is proposing unrealistic ideas and that the West's refusal to further support Ukraine is behind it. This is reflected in many Kremlin resources. On the other hand, there is a different line of commentary, which is mostly in the Telegram channels, where Kremlin and near-Kremlin commentators take each of the 5 points of the plan much more seriously.
На многих кремлевских ресурсах. Есть другая линия комментариев. Она в основном идет в телеграм-каналах, где кремлевские же и околокремлевские комментаторы гораздо серьезнее относятся к каждому пункту
that was voiced by Zelensky.
того плана, который Зеленский огласил.
And there you can see that, first of all, the famous military correspondent Alexander Kotz, who has been working in Komsomolskaya Pravda for many years, immediately wrote, look, in this paragraph, which talks about non-nuclear deterrence, Zelensky proposes to deploy American Typhoons and Tomahawks on the territory of Ukraine. Which will have a range of 750 and even 2,500 kilometers. Someone draws attention to the paragraph in which Zelensky proposes to expand military production on the territory of Ukraine, and so on, i.e., there are both serious and completely hype comments.
Ну и так далее, и так далее. То есть комментарии есть и серьезные, и совершенно хайповые.
Why doesn't the Kremlin comment? The Kremlin usually does not miss an opportunity to comment, but now there is silence. Putin and the Kremlin are probably waiting for the reaction of European leaders and NATO.
Я думаю, во-первых, Путин ждет, и Кремль ждет еще реакции, во-первых, европейских лидеров, что важно, разных структур, потому что, конечно, все ждут, как прокомментирует Рютте, то есть руководство НАТО, что как...
Everyone is wondering how Rutte, France, Germany, Britain, and the United States will react to Zelensky's statement. At the same time, the Kremlin realizes that Kiev has been consulting on the content of the plan with these countries. The lack of public comment from European leaders is noticeable.
Вели консультации, это хорошо известно, и с Францией, Германией, Британией, Соединенными Штатами и Италией.
With whom is Tbilisi consulting? To whom were the first to be presented after the United States? Indeed, this victory plan is now in an extended format after the presentation, indicating that it is being studied, and they do not want to discuss details so that the Kremlin does not learn too much. I get the impression that while Zelensky's plan is seen by some as very general language, it is essentially addressing the Western alliance of support for Ukraine. The 5 points gave the impression of a rather calculated document aimed at advancing discussions on many issues.
И действительно целиком обращенные к западному альянсу поддержки Украины, но на меня эти 5 пунктов произвели впечатление довольно расчетливого документа, который направлен как раз на то, чтобы продвинуть вперед дискуссии, которые уже идут по многим пунктам дальнейших событий 25-26 года.
First, this plan opens a new stage in the discussion of Ukraine's accession to NATO. Rutte has already started to comment on this, and the new head of the North Atlantic Alliance said that the issue of borders is important, but Ukraine will be the 33rd or 34th member of NATO. And we have no doubt about that. The creation of instruments to defend Ukraine from its territory with the help of allied weapons systems is also being considered. This topic was discussed a year ago when there was talk that there could be an alliance of countries that would protect the skies over at least half of Ukraine. The discussion went quiet, but Zelensky's plan brings it back as he proposes non-nuclear deterrent weapons systems.
Так вот, сейчас потом эта дискуссия затихла, но план Зеленского ее возвращает, потому что Зеленский в одном из пунктов явно предлагает, когда речь идет о...
Of course, many in Europe believe that NATO will not do this, but one can imagine an alliance of 45 countries interested in doing so. The United States does not necessarily have to place these weapons in Ukraine. Poland, Sweden, the Baltic states, and other states on NATO's eastern flank could do so. All of this opens up a new discussion, and we will see elements of this strategy for a long war. Every element of this plan will be discussed. In the information space, all the issues of the Russia-Ukraine topic have returned to the surface. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky claims that if the Allies implement this plan, the war will not last longer than 2025. This may be a realistic estimate. What is it based on? Perhaps we will see an invitation to join NATO, at least just an invitation after the U.S. elections, to which much attention is now focused.
Но президент Украины Владимир Зеленский говорит, что если этот план возьмут к реализации наши союзники, то война будет длиться не дольше 2025 года. А возможно, это тоже может быть реальная оценка. Тогда на чем она базируется? А может, мы увидим приглашение о вступлении в НАТО, хотя бы просто приглашение, не само же вступление, после американских выборов, например. К ним сейчас очень много вопросов подвязано.
Американские выборы, конечно, сыграют определенную роль, но надо как раз сказать, что вот эта стратегия, которая сейчас предложена президентом Зеленским, она...
This strategy proposed by Zelensky is a calculated approach to any administration. It removes the controversial points, say for the future administration of President Trump, and all its elements are negotiable with a democratic administration and suitable for European governments.
Они обсуждаемы и с демократической администрацией, если она будет. И точно так же эти элементы, все то, что там оставлено в этой стратегии, оно подходит и для...
I think the American elections are important, but I don't get the impression that what Kiev has now proposed is a document on how, without counting on military success on the battlefield, to create a situation for the Kremlin and Russia in 2025-2026. In which the Kremlin must realize that it will not win under any circumstances. Hence these points, which are understandable. For example, strengthening restrictions on the sale of Russian oil, which actually implies a hidden oil embargo. If not an embargo, then radical action against the tanker fleet that transports Russian oil. There are also suggested options related to agreements within OPEC.
Ограничение на российской продаже нефти, то есть де-факто там предлагается в скрытом виде нефтяное эмбарго, или если не эмбарго, то радикальные действия в отношении танкерного флота, который перевозит российскую нефть. То есть или там предлагается, скажем, какой-то вариант, связанный с
or pushing Russia out of this organization.
Или там выдавливание России.
This is a long-term strategy that is damaging to Russia, just as the prospect of placing missiles, not Ukrainian or American missiles, on Ukrainian territory, but as an element of European defense.
Не украинские ракеты, но и не американские ракеты будут размещены и пусковые установки как элемент обороны Европы будут расположены на территории Украины, это, конечно, неимоверно...
This, of course, significantly increases the pressure on the Kremlin for the foreseeable future. The Kremlin will make threats, including but not limited to nuclear weapons. it may threaten NATO's eastern flank countries with consequences that could include not only nuclear strikes, but also the use of conventional military means, such as sabotage or threats of shelling. There may also be manipulation on the borders with NATO states.
Не только Украине, насколько я понимаю, и могут опять какие-то манипуляции на границах со странами НАТО.
Lukashenko can also re-engage the migrants. They do all that, don't they? Yes, 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 yes. The Kremlin still has the tools to escalate against nearby nations and societies. But on the other hand, if you keep being afraid of the Kremlin, you can't do anything.
Что называется, если продолжать бояться Кремля, то ничего сделать нельзя. И поэтому сама по себе концепция того...
Therefore, the concept that without NATO's direct involvement in this war, a group of countries could adopt the points of Zelensky's plan would make life much easier for Ukraine. On the one hand, it would have created a new situation in the war, i.e., Ukraine would have been much more secure.
Как бы в отношении нее не действовала бы по-прежнему пятая статья.
Although Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty may not be fully activated, Ukraine will still have protection from other countries. We may soon see the creation of ad hoc alliances to help implement the plan. Currently, Ukraine has bilateral military contacts, including training soldiers, mastering equipment, and treating the wounded in various European countries.
Это так, как сейчас и есть. То есть сейчас, собственно, такая же ситуация.
At the same time, there are arms deliveries from various European countries, not just common decisions by the EU or the United States. This practice already exists.
Лечение раненых в разных странах Европы. В то же время есть и поставки вооружений из разных стран Европы, а не только поставки общим решением, там, выделения средств общим решением Евросоюза или...
What is proposed in this paragraph is a radical expansion of this practice, transferring a fragment of Europe's defense to the territory of Ukraine. Yes, indeed, but Putin also has somewhere to expand and with whom. He has permanent allies, not even situational, but a whole cartel, as Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the president's office, says, North Korea and Iran. They are no longer shy about anything at all.
Целый картель, как говорит Михаил Подоляк, советник главы офиса президента Украины, кажется мне он прав в этом определении. КНДР.
What should be the West's appropriate response to what they are about to do?
Паритетный ответ Запада на то, что они собираются и уже делают.
It has to be said that Putin's alliance with the DPRK and Iran is a very weak construct, frankly, in a global sense.
Год назад Путин мог рассчитывать на то, что он вовлечет гораздо больше, и многие этого опасались, что более...
A year ago, Putin could have counted on greater engagement of countries to circumvent sanctions, and many feared this, perhaps even in military support for Russia. However, the DPRK and Iran are still in the position of pariahs on the global political stage. For India, China, and major Asian economies such as the Philippines and Indonesia, as well as Latin America and Brazil, this alliance is of no interest. They are only interested in engaging with Russia if it does not form a narrow alliance with China and Iran. I think that Putin, by concluding a comprehensive agreement with Pyongyang and preparing a similar treaty with Iran, is actually failing the Russian Federation.
Это приведет к тому, что Российская Федерация, она действительно окончательно себя заведет и под
Under the Money Laundering Control Commission, what is called the FATF, and many other severe restrictive measures. Eventually, indeed, there will be various forms of embargoes on the Russian economy, similar to the way they operate on Iran and the DPRK.
И в конечном счете действительно будут разные формы эмбарго в отношении российской экономики, так как они действуют в отношении Ирана и КНДР.
Да, кстати, к ФАТ мы тоже обратились, чтобы в черный списочек, так сказать, если обобщая, Россию внесли и даже уже не думая.
By the way, we have applied to have Russia blacklisted, and it seems to me that Saudi Arabia may play a role that will hurt Russian oil. It has already started to do that. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is going to be much more self-determined about this war and Putin's future line.
Более активно самоопределяться в отношении этой войны и дальнейшей линии Путина, потому что, да, может быть, год назад или даже в середине прошлого года, может быть, были другие настроения.
A year ago, the mood among Saudi leaders was different. They hoped the Kremlin was moving to end the war and implement a plan with which to work. But now the situation has changed, and I think Saudi Arabia is starting to change its position. I think Putin is going to face problems within OPEC, and it's not just Saudi Arabia. We had the impression a year ago that Brazil was supporting Russian Federation, but that's not going to be the case now, no matter what administration is in Washington in a month's time. We don't even hear anything about the China-Brazil plan or the 6 peace initiatives, which are not peaceful either. Even they have stalled. In fact, Putin's actions are digging himself a hole into which yesterday's friends will throw dirt. Yes. I agree with that assessment, because we have no doubt, I think no one, that now that there will be a BRICS summit in Kazan, that when the BRICS summit takes place in Kazan, the leaders of these countries will once again, as usual, ask Vladimir Putin about his plans for this war. They will hear what they usually hear. He rejects all these initiatives, including the China-Brazil initiatives.
Все эти инициативы, китайско-бразильские инициативы, и они уедут с этого БРИКСа с мыслью о том, что ничего как бы невозможно, и тем самым надо самоопределяться.
They will leave the summit with a sense of hopelessness that will force them to continue to engage with Putin. This limits economic and political contacts with major economies. Everyone is interested in successful trade, but Putin seems to think he has everything in order, although he is already looking for money too. The State Duma has found we have about 1.5 trillion rubles to give it additional money for the war it is waging against us from unknown sources. But as we can see, there is still money, and the inner circle probably does not yet realize that it is also necessary to self-determine. Thoughts may creep in, and now it seems that the Russian political community is taking sleeping pills and laxatives at the same time. On the one hand, there is a large-scale anti-corruption fight. Some bosses are being arrested in a flood, and all this, of course, is authorized by Putin. At the same time, there is a public conflict between Kadyrov and Putin's inner circle, and the struggle is already over the division of economic assets. Every day, we read descriptions of looting practices within the Russian economy itself. As for the snooze fest, we see a very slight buildup of patriotic rhetoric about war to the victorious end. However, this sounds extremely unconvincing and is not the primary motivation for all people going to war.
Война до победного конца, но это мы видим хорошо, что звучит оно крайне неубедительно, и не оно является главной мотивацией для тех людей, которые идут на войну.
Putin continues to try to buy the remnants of the population capable of participating in the war. It is clear from many pieces that the situation is dwindling, and it is impossible to raise money either. Putin does not have the situation that many experts sometimes write about, that there is enough money and people indefinitely.
Такая ситуация, о которой иногда пишут наши многие эксперты, что денег хватит бесконечно, людей хватит бесконечно. Нет, я бы так не сказал.
Your words are confirmed by the information that the Chelyabinsk region has become the 7th region since the beginning of October, and we have October 17th, when we talk, the conversation will go out on the 18th. The region raised payments for Putin's crypto mobilization initiative to 2.5 million rubles. And this is not all the promised payments. Why did the new appeals stop going out? On the one hand, yes, it is profitable to fight. A lot is written about it. There are many publications and studies that confirm the position of men's wives who take on this job for money. At the same time, we see that there are publications, and both the central bank and the government record a huge shortage of labor force.
И Центробанк, и правительство российское фиксируют колоссальный дефицит рабочей силы. То есть, с одной стороны, причем для экономики, носящий критический характер, и будет носить все более и более острый характер.
This deficit is critical and will become more and more acute, and it comes from the fact that some people have already been killed, others are trying to lay low and wait it out, and others are simply not skilled enough to keep the economy going. So the Kremlin has a triple problem.
Таким образом, здесь такой, мне кажется, здесь такая тройная проблема имеется у Кремля. Она заключена в том, что
yes, money will be extracted for the war at the expense of the population. This can be seen in the new budget, where there is a huge increase in spending on war for 2025-2026. But at the same time, many programs concerning the population are cut, there are no qualified personnel, and the war takes men away from their families.
А с другой стороны, нет квалифицированных кадров, и с третьей стороны, война уносит.
The result will be a new atmosphere, and it is hard to say what form it will take. It could be a disaffected society, not necessarily a protest society, and there could be different formats. If in 2025, Putin is confronted with a coherent position of a global alliance supporting Ukraine, it will be one situation.
Трудно сказать сейчас, потому что если действительно в 2025 году Путин столкнется с последовательной позицией всего глобального альянса поддержки Украины, будет продолжать иметь с этим дело, то это будет одна ситуация. Если действительно
If the U.S. weakens its position after the U.S. election, it will take time for Ukraine's European allies to regroup.
Европейским союзникам Украины для того, чтобы перегруппироваться и обеспечить продолжение необходимой
and securing the necessary financial, diplomatic, and military assistance. Time is of the essence, and much depends on it. It would be good if, in the first half of 2025, Putin is confronted with the adamant intentions of a global alliance.
Конечно, было бы хорошо, если бы прямо в первой половине 2025 года Владимир Путин к лету бы имел дело с тем, что с непреклонным намерением реализовывать последовательные
to implement consistent measures against him.
стороны глобального альянса.
Yes, I would like to. Of course, it's not a bad timeline, which looks pretty successful against the backdrop of the fact that it's been almost 3 years of full-scale war, the 11th year since Putin launched a war against us, but has yet to be properly punished for it. I am skeptical of the analysis of the Institute for the Study of War, which often cites Russian warlords and obscure data. However, against the backdrop of our plan for victory, they write that Putin's theory of victory is failing, mentioning the inability to mobilize for money and major economic problems. Many other failures appear in the Kremlin. They are indeed right when they say that the long war is no longer Putin's trump card, and time is not playing in his favor, given what we discussed above. Yes, I agree completely. I saw that review too. He, in my opinion, realistically describes the changing situation, including the Kremlin. Well, yeah, actually, oddly enough, is Kadyrov's battle, a weakened form of Prigozhin's rebellion. Kadyrov is a figure like Prigozhin, a fairly important pillar of Putinism. Despite his active participation in the war and his eternal loyalty to Putin, he has to publicly snap and raise the issue of his assets being taken away.
Публично ставить вопрос о том, что посмотрите, у меня отнимают активы, поскольку сейчас выяснилось, что, оказывается, у Кадырова...
It has now emerged that his people had big interests in the marketplace, which is being taken over by the Federal Security Service through Suleiman Kerimov. Everyone writes that General Rubizny, Putin's chief security guard, will now control this marketplace. Many claim that Putin's personal wallet is already being viewed there.
То есть главный охранник Путина становится человеком, который будет контролировать теперь этот marketplace. И, собственно, многие пишут, что там просто...
Kadyrov is offended, and it is news that he is expressing this publicly. This suggests that, as in the situation with Prigozhin's mutiny, there are monstrous gaps and imbalances in Putin's power. It is impossible to talk about a vertical of power, as Putin had 15 years ago, today. His entire system is thinning at various points, and there are ruptures there. Yes, he is fixing them, but it will not last forever.
Видно, что вся его эта система, она в разных точках постоянно истончается ткань этой власти, и там происходят разрывы. Да, он снова потом скрепляет он как-то их, но это не вечно.
You and I said in our first interviews that the regions of the Russian Federation were practically bursting at the seams. Now we see that not only the regions with internal problems, but also Putin's entourage is saying that Kadyrov has flown somewhere to Saudi Arabia. Although the information is not verified, some analysts say that his son may have flown somewhere, and a fate similar to Prigozhin's demise may await him. Such a scenario may be likely, although I don't really believe in it. It's a kind of conspiracy. But the point is not Kadyrov's demise, but the fact that in this war it is clearly visible that Putin did not allow Kadyrov's men to show themselves heroically to the full, did not allow them to record great successes. They are offended. That's the first thing. The second is that in this war, they are not getting what apparently some other towers in the Kremlin are getting. In this sense, Kadyrov's word position is clearly deteriorating. This is obvious, but it is not worth talking about a possible change of power in Chechnya.
Возможно, какая-то смена власти в Чечне? Нет, я не думаю. Я думаю, скорее здесь проблема сейчас, когда мы говорим о российских регионах, проблема в том, что...
Rather, the problem now is that the success of the Ukrainian drone war has created a new situation for the regions of central Russia. This has not even been analyzed to the end. If it started with the Belgorod region, it now covers the Kursk, Bryansk, Voronezh regions, and the southern regions in their entirety.
И южные области в полном объеме, потому что осенью, в конце лета и осенью этого года.
In the fall, late summer, and fall of this year, all of these areas were faced with burning refineries and fuel bases. And it's certainly noticeable to the public. It's hard not to notice. It has definite consequences. Let's see what happens to Central Russia and its sentiments next. I think we can expect unpredictable turns and new formats here. That we talk about in other situations. Thank you, Alexander. We'll put 3 dots. Our topics will be continued. Thank you for taking the time. You're always welcome. Hope to see you soon. Have a good day. Oleksandr Morozov, political scientist and researcher at Charles University in Prague, was with me, Iryna Uzlova. Thank you for spending time with us. Leave comments and likes. It helps our conversations on YouTube. Take care. Believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. See you. We will win.